Your family bloodline is damned. You've seen what has befallen your relatives. You must have had some suspicions. You keep fighting against evil as though you could clean your karma, as though you could remove the curse. You cannot. You were cursed by your creator. Why be loyal to him? What say you? Coming back to their gore-soaked roots, Jen and Sylvia Soska, the writers of Yaira and the lore keepers of the Rippaverse, bring us Bloodruth, with Michael Montenant making his artistic debut in the company, bringing atmospheric panels and horrific imagery, as well as full bloody color brought to us by Brett R. Smith. Bloodruth #1 delivers the story of Sydney Bloodruth in her first outing to Florespark, Texas, happening just before the events of Isom #2, and showcasing how Sydney met Gooding, as well as foreshadowing the things about to befall the city. Seeking answers for an unknown threat upon the horizon, Sydney finds herself going to Florespark, causing her to get caught up in a deal with the shady elite couple of Michael Copper and Lillian Renashi to purge the haunting of their newest acquisition, a castle on the outskirts of Florespark. Accepting the contract, Sydney must use all the powers her blood can manifest to purge the evils that have taken root within the old stone dwelling, and the echoes of her past, which threaten not only her body, but her soul. Let us talk about Sydney for a moment, shall we? The last active member of the cursed Bloodruth family, Sydney finds herself standing alone against the darkness that is hidden in plain sight. In a world of super cops like Alpha Core, or street-level heroes like Isom, or intergalactic powerhouses that you'll end up finding in Yaira or Zaylan, Bloodruth offers a different style of storytelling, dealing in the occult, mysticism, with a familial curse that has brought a suffocating grief to her life. Her power set includes retrocognition, blood-fueled constructs, necromancy, and the use of fantastical familiars. This often causes her extreme fatigue, probably brought about by anemia, forcing her to improvise with alarming frequency, demonstrating quick wit at using her environment against her foes. Strong ties to family continue to haunt her, and the strength of purpose unmatched by any hero we've seen in the Rippaverse. Bloodruth is a wonderful mix of detective, sorceress, and hunter. Michael Copper and Lillian Renashi, the power couple, are back. Having recently purchased the castle as is, they find themselves at an impasse. Having hired Gooding's services for problem solving, there's always more than meets the eye with these two in their machinations for the city. Michael serves as the front man of the two, coming across as a smooth criminal archetype, while Lillian is a mix of conniving elegance and sadist. They continue to implement their designs for the city with an interesting insight into the underworld that exists in Florespark. Michael Gooding, the polymath, makes his third appearance in the Rippaverse, fundamentally Sydney's equal but opposite. What Sydney is to the occult, Gooding is to tech, an inventor, an entrepreneur extraordinaire. These seem to end up giving him a very skill set that is not to be tested in most cases. However, when he does run across a issue that is beyond his expertise, beyond the material, he has the wherewithal to end up seeking those who do know, and thus seeks out Sydney for a job, one that is outside of his capabilities. Bloodruth is the first real dive for the Rippaverse into the world of horror. The Twisted Twins, Jen and Sylvia Soska, showcase their love of the genre in rare form. Comics are a niche unto themselves, and so horror comics are a niche within a niche, often making them a rarity that is used for more than just blood and gore. To actually involve a story, to start to develop an entire line, well, I can only imagine how happy that makes the Twisted Twins now. They manage to strike a balance when the blood starts falling, and make it count for the most impact. We feel for Bloodruth, the weight of her family curse being with her in every step. Beautifully drawn by Michael Montenant. Michael may be my new favorite interior artist. It's the atmosphere that he ends up bringing, the hard shadows that bring out an unease that you should feel in the slower moments, and unapologetic when things get messy. The drowning scene in particular was a joy for me to read, and threatens to pull you in to its depths, right along with Sydney. Sydney's dysfunctional family dynamic sets up the promise of more stories to tell, and in a way that builds the anticipation while still not feeling like we need to carve the fat with a meat cleaver. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and just seeing Bloodruth Manor in its slowly decaying state tells us all we need to know without a word being said. The greater demon Deertick is one of my newest joys in the Rippaverse. Visually, she's a broken mirror to Sydney Bloodruth. Mostly in the design elements, we can end up noticing the color swaps, mirrored but opposite, but showcasing elements of design that end up making them echo each other, right down to the forearm tattoos. I have suspicions that we'll be seeing Deertick return in later books. I certainly hope so, at least. The flashback of Silk, the vampiric devil, is probably the one villain I'm most clamoring for. Being a fan of the living dead, and with strong ties to Sydney's past, I look forward to seeing the Soskas deliver on the promise he provides in pushing Sydney to the brink. What happened in that castle to bring such evil upon it? What still lurks and haunts those hallways? There's no disappointment in the answers, and it implies something far bigger on the horizon. If I had to end up making a critique, two come to mind. The first one, and is probably the biggest standout for anybody who's read Bloodruth, is, unfortunately, a particular set of pages. I absolutely adore Michael's work. So I find it pitiable when I end up realizing that we have a double-page spread that is, well, bluntly, split up. That's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because, well, two things. One, this is a highlight moment for the demon we're being introduced to, Choke. And it's more of a pity because it has a perfect setup on the previous page. The previous page is set up for a decent page turn. When we end up seeing the first instances of Choke, I almost imagine that should be like a silhouette to hide what he is at first, making us want to turn the page into a beautiful double page spread. Because, speaking as an artist myself, the double page spread is where you get to go a little wild, where you're really able to sink your teeth and showcase a moment in time. And that moment is incredibly visceral. That should be the moment where not only are you shocked to see it, you should be just looking at the spectacle, taking in all the bloody chunk details that are put onto page. And at this moment of build-up, instead, we get this brick wall moment where the flow is completely broken from the book, where we know something's off and we're taken completely out of it. That's to illustrate the importance of formatting. I don't know what happened, because what I see is a setup and somehow the page count was off. The second is not as impactful on the first reading, but is a bit of a nitpick. When Sydney first enters Florespark, and she starts to cast her ritual to understand what she's dealing with in Florespark, she points to a castle. That, just her pointing to it, when she first meets Gooding, causes a little bit of disruption in my mind. The reason being is that Gooding is there to serve as her guide towards these gates, towards the hell she's about to end up entering. But very little would have been lost if she just said no and went there anyway. The only thing you would be removing is the side plot. While the side plot does set up or explain some of the setup that we end up getting in ISOM 2, just removing that one element would have ended up making it run a lot smoother. It would have been allowing Gooding to serve the purpose he's supposed to, without making us wonder, will she, won't she? With it feeling like the side setup being a little less consequential due to the events transpiring. And that's just a little frustrating to me. Maybe I'm missing something on that. Who knows? Still, I'd be hard-pressed to think of a stronger first step into the world of horror. Bloodruth tells a solid standalone story with the promise of more to come. Enjoyably graphic at times, it doesn't use the shock factor as a crutch to make up for flimsy world building. Instead, we get to showcase some of the strongest setups I've encountered from the company, and it shows how much these girls love Sydney. I really can't get enough of Michael Montenant's work, because not only is he an amazing choice for Bloodruth, I legitimately think he's the only choice. I cannot imagine Bloodruth being drawn by anyone else. And I legitimately think he has taken the top slot for me as an interior artist amongst the Rippaverse. Bravo, good sir. And I'm a sucker for good inks. If you're a fan of the occult, mystery, action, monstrous demons, and tragedy, you'll be hard-pressed to find a better pick in Rippaverse's Bloodruth